We've got 8 of the best 4-drive wagons money can buy, and we're going to be putting them head-to-head on-road, off-road, and towing to see which one you should spend your hard-earned money on.
That sounds good.
It looks very cheap. It looks like it was an afterthought.
I feel like I'm in a Tesla here.
What you get for the money, outstanding. It's probably the first time ever that I'm disappointed in a Toyota.
Unlike some other motoring journalists who test these wagons by taking them to their closest winery, we're here to test them properly. Over the next week, we're going to be taking them on a 2,000-kilometre road trip from Brisbane to Coffs a long way and back, on some tracks you'd probably never think of taking your brand new 4-drive down. We know these days with interest rates and the cost of living, the price of these things is crucial. So we're going to look at the price of all of them to then determine the best value for money, particularly with how much of a price gap we have on all the models we're testing. Just because it's the cheapest doesn't mean it's going to win value for money, and just because it's the most expensive doesn't mean it's going to win overall. To get you the info you need, we've handpicked Australia's top industry experts who work on these vehicles every single day. They know the good, the bad, and everything in between that you should know before you buy one. So let's check out the lineup. We've gone with the 8 most popular family wagons in Australia, including the new Prado, for our massive 2025 4-drive wagon comparison. The new Toyota Prado has copped a serious design change compared to previous models and shares plenty of similarities with the 300 that we'll be looking at closely over the test. Backing up the Toyota team on this test is the big 300 series Landcruiser. The 6-cylinder 300 we have on the test is the upper range Sahara model. Next, we've got the mighty Nissan Patrol Y62 with its fire-breathing 5.6 litre V8. We've got ourselves the latest iteration of the Y62, the Warrior. The Ineos Grenadier has hit the ground running in Australia, tailoring to more of the enthusiasts among us. The model we're testing is the Trialmaster, and is one of only 2 vehicles on this test that are twin-locked from factory. The Isuzu MU-X has been a popular choice for Aussie families. It's a no-nonsense, comfortable and proven setup. The model we have is their top-of-the-line LST. Pajeros have long been an underrated option when it comes to wagon choices. Backed by one of the best warranties you can get from a vehicle manufacturer in Australia, let's see if this quiet achiever can stand up to the other big names on the test. The Ford Everest is the highest selling wagon in Australia currently. As of October 2024, it's sitting 4th in sales in new vehicles behind the Hilux and Ranger. Aside from the 300 series, it's the only other vehicle on the test with a V6 diesel. On last year's Ute test, the GWM Cannon dual cab surprised the heck out of us, and now we're looking at its wagon cousin, the Tank 500. The Tank is the only true hybrid vehicle on the test. With a direct injection 2-litre turbo 4-cylinder petrol engine and an electric motor, let's see how it stacks up against the others. All these vehicles are automatic and diesel except for the Tank and the Y62, and they're about to get tested like no new 4-drive wagon has ever been tested before. That's the lineup for this year's test. Have we missed one? Tell us below what vehicle you'd like to see us test next. Righto, enough talk, let's get into it. Now it's time for the test that I've been most excited for. It's time to see how these wagons go off-road. Now, it goes without saying, if you're looking to buy one of these vehicles, chances are you're not really going to be using it for proper hardcore off-roading. It's going to be built up more as a tourer for the weekend camping trip, or for maybe that once-in-a-lifetime dream trip. So, to find out which vehicle is the best off-road, we're going to point our noses up a couple of tracks in Coffs Harbour and see which one comes out on top. With the tyres aired down and the convoy pointing towards our first track of the day, it's not long until one car is struggling to even make the first challenge.
Just got the call up from Jocko on the radio behind me. It's a super slippery hill. He's got the Prado stuck. He's called for a tow. They don't come with the best tyres and it's pretty slippery down there, so we're going to need a solid axle vehicle with a BMW engine and gearbox, you know. Pretty much my GU, but we're in the Ineos. I'm going to back down, give him a quick little tow, and we'll be on our way.
I reckon if it had some off-road tyres on it, it'd probably be alright. It's just those highway terrains, slippery Coffs mud. I reckon if I was going to be using my Prado off-road, I'd get rid of those tyres quick smart.
The beauty of trailing the Ineos is it already comes with built-in recovery points on that rear bar. A quick run of the strap and a little tug up the hill and we should be able to reach the real challenge. and put these wagons through their paces.
We're taking the Everest up its first track, and it's pretty slippery. The highway tires are doing their best. If you plan on doing tracks like this, you best get some better tires. We don't have any traction aids on at the moment, and we're really struggling to get up. I reckon we might have to try the locker real soon, but at the moment, she's just progressing.
On this section of track, we're doing our best to take the vehicles up first without any selectable traction aids to see how the traction control system works. Then, if they need it, we'll engage traction aids from there, like factory lockers if they have them.
Just turning some sensors off. This MU-X just jumps on the brakes for you as soon as it thinks that you're going to hit something. Even things as small as tufts of grass will cause the brakes to do an emergency lock-on.
Unlike the Ute range, where most have lockers, the wagons are slightly different across the board. The Prado and 300 come with a centre diff lock, with the MU-X, Pajero, Everest and Y62 all having factory rear lockers, with the Tank and Ineos both coming twin-locked.
Walks over it.
We're working our way up the hill here in the wagons, and the first couple of challenges we tried no traction aids. A few more rocks and ruts and holes here, so I reckon we might be using traction aids. We're going to get a little wheel lift here as it torques up. There it is. There it is. Let's drive through that, see what she likes. Yeah, that's it. Smooth. Damn it. Whatever there, we're pretty much on the line. We just didn't have enough momentum. Obviously no front locker in this vehicle. Hit a tiny rock and stopped. All the power in the back with the rear locker. Just skidded over.
The camera, the off-road camera is pretty good for backing up.
One of the biggest things I've noticed with the Everest is the throttle control. It's super twitchy off-road. It's nothing a little more seat time won't fix, but currently it's a hard vehicle to drive technical tracks with.
Yeah!
Well, we got up, but I did not feel comfortable in it.
These are all brand new vehicles, and as we continue to push up the track, I've asked the boys to take it easy.
I'm probably going to try and follow the line that Jock took in the Everest. It seemed to work really well for that car. I know the wheel track on this is just a little bit wider. I am in low range, four-wheel drive with all of the sensors turned off. And the centre diff lock in.
As the Prado scrabbles its way up, you can see that traction control working well.
Just got the thumbs up from the boys, so we'll just keep coming straight. Well, that was very impressive.
Beautiful line.
I might have spoken too soon. That same spot I slid in with the Everest has caught the MU-X out.
The back of the car slipped to the right a little bit, just off line, and there was a rock there. Not much of a rock, just nicked the side step, and it's come off.
That's a prime example of where bar work comes into its own. Fortunately, the side step didn't get damaged and it'll be an easy fix.
The vehicle, obviously, with probably the most capability off-road.
The one that's made for this stuff.
Yeah, let's see how the Grenadier goes. He doesn't have his lockers in by the looks.
With the unlock challenge not working out, Matt's flicking those two lockers on and it should just crawl up.
There you go, what a difference that's made.
Yeah. Alright, that's better.
Yeah, I've had a few cars struggle up this climb, but we'll see how the Y62 goes. I reckon it's going to walk up here pretty easy.
As we saw with the Prado, the likes of the Y62 and 300 series should all breeze up this thanks to their wide wheel track. Having that wide track really helps with tyre placement outside the ruts and help find that extra traction. Whilst the Tank is twin-locked, Ian is driving this purely with traction control. And it's impressive.
That's sensational.
That was far more impressive than we were expecting. Wow.
Even more impressive than the Prado and the 300 because he was going that slow and the track control just kicked in straight away.
Yeah, he didn't have his lockers in.
Yeah.
Wow.
Sending the little Mitzi up the second climb here. It's
see how this thing goes.
The Pajero's picking wheels and scrabbling around like the Everest was, but that rear locker is really helping it find traction up the hill. It did that reasonably well. These vehicles all have vastly different approach and departure angles. And to help us better understand a bit more about that, we have Dave from Offroad Animal. Dave has built his life from making bull bars and bar work in the four-drive industry and has a wealth of knowledge on how to best protect those important parts on a four-wheel drive.
Have a look at the front here. This Everest is about to rip its front off. Very important that you look after your approach angle, your ramp over angle, and your departure angle when you go on off-road. Now these factory bumpers here are pretty vulnerable. They've got some high-tech, expensive gear like parking sensors and cameras and radar. So it would be advisable to look for an aftermarket bull bar so you can actually enhance the approach angle of your vehicle and really protect the front of it. Now approach angle is when the vehicle like this is coming up an obstacle. It's the angle between the front and the tires. Now, the more angle you have there, the better you are of not damaging your front bumper or your vehicle. So the factory bumper like this is nice and low, looks good, great for airflow, not that great for off-roading. So if you look at a high quality aftermarket bull bar, you can increase this approach angle with a tougher, stronger steel component that'll allow you to go over obstacles like this without damaging your car. You need a good place to put accessories like a winch and lights, but most importantly, recovery points. Right now, we're gonna get stuck here if we go any further, and this Everest will be in trouble. So an aftermarket bull bar with some good recovery points, if we do get stuck, we can get ourselves out if we don't have a winch. So make sure you look for something that's going to really enhance your full drive to make it better off-road, not just for animal protection, but also when you're hitting the tough tracks.
One thing that's become apparent in this test is obviously all these vehicles come with different standards of tyres on them from the factory, and some of the tyres have struggled much more than others. What we did do is air them all down to 20 PSI, and now we're about to jump back on the road, so I'm going to fire up the old Morphlate compressor, get them all up to road pressures, and head to our next test area. How good?
One thing that coming from driving older vehicles just drives me up the wall with these modern vehicles is how much they beep at you and carry on. Every single time you start the car and you got to turn things off. Yeah, I know obviously the sensors are there for a reason, but off-road, I'm in low range and going down a hill, I don't need my parking sensors on. And yeah, you can turn them off, but a lot of cars, you got to turn it off every single time you start the car. A prime example would be the IDAS system in the MU-X. That loses its brain off-road when you drive towards a low-hanging branch and tries to brake the car. And then this thing keeps beeping at me going down a hill. It's like, mate, I'm not in a shopping center. So you turn it off and it's fine, but it just is frustrating. Do you reckon I'm on the money with that? Are parking sensors and things for the vehicles you drive off-road, if they're modern, do they get frustrating, or is it something you've just learnt to live with and you're used to it now? It's not a big deal. For me, coming from an older vehicle, as I said, it's a lot, but maybe it's something you get used to with a bit of seat time in a modern car. With a bit of seat time testing these wagons on the track, it's time to test them on the beach. All these modern four-wheel drives have plenty of power and eat up the beach. However, there was one vehicle we noticed an issue with.
One thing I've noticed with the Tank is when you go to take off, there's a bit of delay in the throttle until everything kicks in, and then you take off real well. But then when you back off, there's a bit of overrun, and I reckon it's probably to do with the electric motors. But on the beach, it can definitely take a little bit of getting used to, because, you know, if you need to take off slowly and gradually, you just got to get your throttle position right. But it's still doing the beach fine, but there's a fair bit of throttle lag there.
Although it didn't have the articulation we expected, the Ineos scored best because it's twin-locked with live axles straight off the showroom floor. The Toyotas did great and definitely have the best traction control tech. The Everest struggled a bit and seems to be built more for the tarmac than the tough stuff.
We know that a lot of you are going to be interested in one of these wagons, so you can take the family away and tow something like one of these. So to find out which one tows the best, we've got two vans from Lifestyle Campers, a single axle and a dual axle variant, to see which one of these wagons tows the best.
We've also got Luke from Lifestyle Campers along with us as our towing expert.
Alright, so the two lifestyle campers we have here for Wagon of the Year are the Fusion, which is a single axle hypercamper coming in at 2,200 kilos with a 3-ton ATM. We've also got a Recon R4T LRX coming in at 2,600 kilo tare weight with a 3.5-ton ATM, Recon being a tandem axle camper.
For this test, not all vehicles had a trailer brake controller, so we wanted to test all of these vehicles as tow vehicles. So Bendix have been working on this product. This is a prototype, and the idea of this is the portable trailer brake controller. So all we have is one unit that goes in between your trailer lead and your car, and then this piece here you can just plug in into the vehicle. So this way we can now move it from vehicle to vehicle. Takes about 10 minutes, any car, any trailer.
Tow car wise for the Ford Everest, impressive. I think straight off the showroom floor, you can tow. The only thing you'd probably do is maybe airbags. If you want to change the suspension, airbags, and it would tow down. It comes standard with a brake controller, heaps of power, engine braking is awesome. They steer beautiful, very impressive if you're looking at a tow car.
So I'm towing the 2.2 ton single axle behind the Everest, and we're on some dirt roads and stuff, handling it, no dramas at all, tows really well, absolutely magic. I think just such great value for money. What you get in this vehicle for the money is just outstanding.
All right, so I'm in the Mitsubishi Pajero Sport, and we've just put on the camper trailer. It's a single axle one. We're pretty much on the limit of what this car can tow. I think it's got about a 250 kilo bull weight on this car. I think the limit is around that 310. The car is definitely squatting the rear. It's obviously feeling that way. I don't know how you'd go with 310 on the back and then you put some people in the car and so forth. I think that would be, definitely would need some attention there to make sure that's going to be safe.
Power-wise, it's handling it really well. Using the little paddle shifts in here is actually pretty good. Just keep it in the right gear, keep it in the right revs, and it's actually pulling up the hills pretty well. If you're going to be getting one of these and towing with it, I definitely recommend putting in a suspension upgrade with it. It's going to be a much nicer, safer ride.
Right, so I've had the recon behind the Isuzu MU-X. It's motoring along quite nicely. It's sitting on 100 k's an hour pretty easily. Does slow down a little going up big hills, but really nothing to be concerned about. One thing to note is it is a little soft in the rear suspension, but really nothing to be worried about. If you were looking at buying something like this, it might be a consideration to put a set of bags in the back or perhaps upgrade that rear suspension.
Been towing on the freeway in the big 300 for the last sort of half an hour. I reckon if I owned one of these, I would probably leave it alone. It's lovely. I mean, I know I've got the van on the back, but it's still doing it with ease. Toyota did something right with this vehicle. It still boggles my mind at the cost, but if you can afford one, it's beautiful.
For those who, they may be hanging on to their 200 series, the V8s, I can tell you that this is an extremely torquey setup. I would urge anyone to drive this if they were considering upgrading from their 200 series without discounting the fact that it's a V6.
I've jumped out of the 300 and straight into the new Prado, so this has been really interesting. I am towing currently, but irrespective of towing, I think Toyota have missed the mark with the new Prado, and here's why. The whole reason, in my opinion, that you ever bought a Prado was because it was a smaller Landcruiser. It was easier to park, it was easier to get around, it was perfect for the daily drive, picking the kids up or doing shopping or what have you, and it just wasn't this big cumbersome Landcruiser to take everywhere. It was efficient. Now Toyota have brought out this new Prado and it's so similar to the 300, I think they've made it too big. It's the same width, it's 10mm longer wheelbase, it's a similar height, it's a big car, and it's kind of lost the whole reason you'd buy a Prado in the first place. Yeah, obviously the cabs are different, the cab on the 300 is still bigger, but driving this, it feels like a big vehicle. There is a lot of bonnet in front of you, and I just don't think Toyota have quite nailed it with the whole reason you buy a Prado. If it were me, would I buy the top of the line Prado or save a little bit more money and buy the base model 300? I mean, you get 2 extra cylinders, you get a V6, you get an extra turbo, and driving that 300, it was beautiful to drive. It was so powerful and comfortable. You get 70 more kilowatts straight away. This thing, even though I'm towing, it still is working pretty hard with that 1GD.
So I finally got behind the wheel of the V8 Patrol with a caravan on the back. Listen to that. But it does seem to make more noise than deliver the power. You'll probably find this really benefit from an exhaust upgrade and a tune. And it would be a weapon.
The Ineos actually feels pretty good. It didn't squat down too much in the rear with the ball weight of the van. The two things I'd note though, and they're quite minor, The reverse camera is offset on the back, so it's actually kind of hard to line up your tow ball tongue with the van. Once you get a bit of seat time in it though, I reckon you'll be able to nail it. The other thing that's a bit more of a point to mention is the turning circle. If you have to turn around with a van like this in a tight spot, you might find with the Ineos Grenadier you'll need a spotter because the turning circle is not that good. Apart from that though, that BMW engine and the 8-speed transmission, it tows with plenty of power and it feels pretty good.
The 300 and Y62 towed the best without doubt. The Everest's V6 definitely took out third place in this category.
Before we take these things out bush and put them to the test, we're down at EFS. I'm going to do exactly what we did with the Utes last year. We're going to throw these things up on the hoist, rip a wheel off, jack them up, and we're going to work out the good things about the suspension, the bad things about the suspension, and little things to keep in mind if we do want to do any aftermarket mods to these vehicles. Anyway, I'm going to waste no time and get stuck straight into it.
To help us get the right information on the pros and cons with each vehicle's suspension setup, we've got Tom. Tom works on these vehicles day in and day out at EFS and is a guru when it comes to all things suspension.
Kicking off with Team Toyota, we've got the new 300 here. Now, I'm not really a Toyota guy, but the first thing I see when I look at this is everything is massive. Like this back bush here is humongous, that sway bar is massive. What's your expert opinion on the front end of these things, mate?
Well, they definitely don't miss you when it comes to over-engineering on the 300. Just a lot like the 200 series,
Yeah.
It's very similar. Like you said, huge sway bars, you got a nice long strut. This is a new addition for the 300 series, the aluminium knuckle,
Yeah.
much like we saw on the Ranger as well. They've relocated the bottom mount on the strut here, just to allow for an even longer strut than the 200 had.
Ah, yeah,
and
yeah.
we've got no more KDSS on the sway bar, so no hydraulic system on the sway bar.
Ah, so going back just a simple sway bar.
Exactly, keep it simple, stupid. So with the rear end, it's very similar to the 200. Like I said, they've made a couple of tweaks.
Yeah.
They've moved the shocks to the outside of the chassis, which is better for stability, and it's
Yeah.
also greater for anyone fitting shocks, so you don't have to fight and bash
Yeah, they were
knuckles
hard
like
to
the
get
200.
to, the top of the 200s, weren't they?
Yeah, they're a pain, real pain in the knuckles.
The much anticipated Landcruiser 250 series Prado, mate. I reckon they look unreal, and I'm quite surprised under here. To me, it looks very similar to the 300 series. Am I wrong in saying that, or am I right?
No, you'd be dead on, because it is the same platform as the 300 series, and the first time we looked at it, we thought, oh, well, this is going to be easy because it's all pretty much the same.
Yeah, yeah.
We've got slightly different weights, so like lighter coils and a slightly different sway bar location. Back's almost identical.
Like for like, yeah, true. That's crazy because, yeah, the Prado, you think of a Prado, a much smaller car to match up with the Everest and the MU-X and stuff, but underneath they're the exact same platform as the big, strong 300 series.
That's what I was thinking. When you had the 200 series and the 150, it was much lighter on.
Yeah.
Now we've got the 300 series and the 250, and this is just as heavy duty, so.
We've got the Pajero Sport up on the hoist to have a closer look at this suspension, and in here looks pretty similar to the earlier model Tritons, mate.
We've still got the same issues that we've had since these came out, and that's with the limited room around the control arm here. And we've also got, you know, bump stop clearance issue here. It just means we can't fit a very big strut in the front. Valve's just on the inside of the arm. Like, you can fix that with aftermarket upper control arms as well. That helps a bit, but we're still very limited in the front. Apparently, it's rumoured the 2025 model is going to have the updated front like the MV Triton has, which has a control arm.
Oh, control them up high, plenty more room for upgrades and stuff.
Yeah, and a lot better ride, and there's a lot of improvements being made there. There's nothing wrong with this setup. It just could be better in a few areas.
And you've got to sort of plan ahead if you're doing modifications to make sure it fits.
If we have a look at the back of this, you'll actually see the bushes starting to squash out just because they've got so much tension on them.
Yeah, right.
In terms of upgrading them, putting a lifted spring in and a shock to suit, not many issues there. Like, it's fairly straightforward. If you want to get a lift for going off-road, it's quite easy.
And you have to change arms or a caster or anything like that? It's pretty good medium
they're
point
pretty good
to start
setup
with.
in the back. Yeah, we like with most cars, we're limited to 50 mil anyway for legality reasons, and we do like a 40 mil lift on these to stay within those
stays in with the specs. That's perfect. This one is a bit different to the rest. I'd probably say this is the most unique out of all the new modern wagons because of this big solid front diff. It's the Ineos Grenadier. Probably not going to drive as nice on the road compared to all the other wagons. When you off-road, this thing will come into its own thanks to the solid front diff, I reckon.
Yeah, we're throwing it to the old school, mate. We've got a 5-link front end here. We've got big chunky drag links.
Mate, all this, for standard steering, this is so massive. 5-link front and back, although the arms are short, it should articulate quite nicely. Obviously, I'm surprised there's not a radius hub in here, but that's good for the off-roader, that.
Yeah, it'll flex nice and well. It's not going to drive like any of the other cars on the road. It doesn't have the independent front and all that control, but it's going to be, you know, tough as guts off-road.
Yeah.
One thing I've noticed here, Jesse, is that the steering damper is right at the bottom.
It's almost lower than that diff pumpkin, mate.
Yeah, so like if you're going to drop down into any like big ruts or into any rocky areas, it might be prone to getting snotted.
Very vulnerable.
I guess we'll find out.
One thing I've noticed, both in the front and the back, this theme continues to run along, is all the arms at stock ride height are pretty flat. So these arms are flat, Although they're short, they're nice and flat. And a cool thing is, on the back here, they've got an adjustable camber bolt. So you do lift it, you can recorrect that caster. Panhard rods are nice and flat too, which means when you lift it, you're not going to put it out too much. They might put in a little bit more of an angle, but I know like a standard older four-wheel drives like Patrols and 80s, the arms are already on an angle, and you lift them on a bigger angle.
The diff pushes right
So this,
across.
I'd say this, put a 2-inch lift in this, you could probably still run all the standard arms. It's still going to drive pretty nice.
I can't see too many sticking points in the back here. The fuel tank sits really low, and we've got some pretty low mounts on these lower arms, but aside from that, looks pretty good under here. I reckon it's going to go pretty good off-road. So here we got the Isuzu MU-X. It's a 2024 model, and it's basically exactly the same since they come out in 2020. We've got a double wishbone there. Great front suspension setup. There is one concern to keep in mind on the front end of these MU-Xs is that they are known to have bump steer issues. There's a couple of fixes for it, but if you're looking at lifting your vehicle, just keep in mind one of those remedies to fix that, because otherwise you're going to see uneven tyre wear and you're going to be wearing out those expensive tyres that you put all your money into. In the rear of the MU-X here, it's a fairly standard 5-link rear end. We just got a coil and a shock rear end, so any upgrades are fairly simple. There's minor clearance issues, but it's a great all-rounder rear end and plenty of upgrades available.
This one is quite an interesting one. I haven't actually seen many of these on the road. It's the Tank 500. I've seen plenty of the 300s. They're meant to be a good platform.
Yeah, very similar to the Tank 300, which is very similar to a lot of the Japanese manufacturers. As soon as we pull this wheel off, you look at that front end and you go, oh, it's a Hilux.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen it before. Yeah.
The only difference I can really see is it's got an aluminium upper control arm. I mean, everything else, like we've done some measurements in the front of these. Obviously, we've developed a coil which will give you 30mm lift straight off the bat.
Yeah.
But it's essentially the exact same spring height as a Toyota Hilux or Prado.
Yeah.
And basically everything else is almost exactly the same.
Nice long strut in there, plenty of clearance around it, so if you don't want to go bigger, you can make it fit, which is good.
Yeah, it's a proven design, mate. This is the same front end as like most of your dual cabs out of there, and a lot of the wagons out there as well. So like we know it's going to work. We just got to see how all of the components actually hold up. The only thing is on the back of this is because it's a hybrid, it's actually got a big battery pack.
I did see that right over the rear of the axle.
Or like in a Prado, maybe a fuel tank. So whether that plays into weight calculations in the rear, we'll have to have a look at and see how it drives. All right, here we've got the brand new V6 Ford Everest. In the front, it's business as usual with all these wagons, I guess, double wishbone front. But this one actually has this big aluminium knuckle, which is interesting.
It's quite big and staunch by the looks of it.
Yeah, it looks really tough, but it's also really light, so it keeps that unsprung weight down. And as you can see, this coil here, it's nowhere near as tight as any of the other coils, so that'll actually give it like quite a plush ride.
Fair bit of comfort, yeah. I was quite impressed too when we jacked up to take the wheel off. It looks like it's got quite a bit of wheel travel from factory there.
Yeah, they do. I find these are actually, they sit pretty high. They're like, got a quite good ride height straight off the bat. Obviously, we can improve that even further, but they do have a fair bit of travel as well. Yeah. We don't have a panhard rod on the live axle on the rear. It's actually a Watts link. So what this does is this center pivots as the car goes up and down, and that actually keeps the diff in the middle. Whereas if you're running a panhard rod, what happens is when the wheels move away from the body, it moves in an arc and it actually moves your track left and right as it goes up and down. This keeps your diff right in the middle the whole time.
The big Y62 is up on the hoist. Now this is the Warrior model, hence the red spring. Obviously they come lifted from the factory, but take that away, put a standard spring in. All the suspension the exact same as the other model Y62s.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same suspension setup as most of the other cars we got here with the double wishbone, but we've got this up here. You see all these hydraulic lines? That's actually HBMC, or hydraulic body motion control.
Yeah.
Essentially that stiffens up the outer side when you go around corners to try and help reduce body roll further.
So that's pretty much the sway bar, because I've noticed there's no sway bar on the front of this, so that acts as that. And there's a whole system in the car that makes that work.
You got to think a sway bar, which is just a solid piece of bar with 2 links at the end, is a lot less complicated than this system. And this also limits you with not being able to change the strut because you're locked into having this system.
Okay. Well, we spoke about the Ineos being totally different to all the other wagons because it's solid front, solid back. This one is totally different on the opposite end of the scale. It's independent front, independent back. Now, it does have the hydraulic suspension, but there's a lot going on here. There's 1 arm, 2 arm, there's 3 arms, the coils here, the shocks there. I've seen many of these with alignment issues on the back, Tom. Yeah,
well, you've got 2 places to adjust these. You can adjust it on this back arm that holds the coil here. Yeah. That's got a slight amount of adjustment to push that out and forwards at the same time. And then you've got another eccentric pin here to do. Once you lift these, if you're trying to go a 50mm lift, those are usually not within scope. So you're looking at offset bushes, new control arms. There's a few different ways to do it, but like you said, geometry-wise and getting the alignment in the rear, that's the biggest sticking point.
And a tricky thing you got to really think about when you're setting these up for towing is as soon as the car goes up and down, all those angles change. So you want to make sure you set it up, if you're going on a big trip, get alignment with the weight in the back for your caravan to suit. I'm keen to see this thing off-road because out of all the cars here, it does have the biggest tyre, that's going to help, but obviously it's got the best diff clearance being independent front and back. All the other cars have got a big pumpkin there and everything's hanging low.
Yeah, it's got huge clearance in the middle.
In a big rut, I think this thing should be a bit of an animal. I don't think we'll scrape anything.
The Everest, Prado and 300 get the highest marks because of their big beefy front end design that allows for a proper lift and strut to be put in. Very easy to modify. Whilst the patrol suspension is good, the high tech in it means it's extremely hard to modify and repair should something go wrong. To get you the right info on this test, we've got Matt from Just Autos along with us. Just Autos are one of the biggest names in diesel performance in Australia and are at the forefront of modern vehicle performance and upgrades. Recently, they've been getting incredible results with vehicles like the 300 series. You'll want to hear what he has to say because some of these vehicles may have engines that won't stand up to what you need them to do.
One of the cars here is the 300 series. It's actually my favourite car, but there is a few little problems that we have to jump onto and talk about. The 300 series has been out for about 3 years, so we've seen it in the field, towing a lot of cars, carrying a lot of weight. And one of the things we've noticed when we first had this car on the scene was the intake pipes on this car. About 12 months through the production, they changed the part number of that, and we had issues where we started to see some guys with block filters and so forth sucking these intakes in and having problems with turbos and so forth. It's something that we have a rectification coming for that intake pipe at the moment, but it's something to be wary of. The next thing with the 300 series is that as we're towing more weight and we're adding bigger GVM and towing bigger vans, we need to be considerate of heat, and heat's our biggest problem in any car when towing heavy loads. So one of the biggest things that we add to these cars is what we call a heat exchanger. The heat exchanger helps reduce our intake temps down and gives our power for a lot longer so we don't have any issues there. Obviously there's a lot of power to be had in this engine. It's one of my most favorite engines to tune. It's very responsive, it's a very efficient engine. So even with the power levels that we get to, it creates really, really good fuel consumption, and that's something that's a huge positive. So the next biggest thing that we see with the 300 series is oil, and we've done a couple of videos based on this and the 020 that they come out with factory, and obviously reading your handbook, and the dealer recommends a 530 oil to be put in if you're in severe condition, that is when you're heavy towing and so forth. The big thing here is very important to understand that this car, majority of us, what we're doing in Australia, we're in that severe condition, if not past that point. So you have to be very mindful of that. So I do recommend talking to your dealer about the correct oil to put into these engines. So we get this question asked quite a lot about why do I have this issue with the 300 series and not a 200 series? For starters, they run a different weight oil. Also, the VDJ has a larger sunk capacity. So you will find that the same problem will happen in a VDJ engine if you run that same weight oil and you lower the capacity of it. It's just the way that it works. Unfortunately, this engine with the design of it, the sump capacity is one problem, but the oil weight is all moved to a 020, and this is based around parasitic losses for emissions. So a lot of people struggle to understand why they've gone this way, but it's basically around that fact to meet a certain criteria for emissions to be able to sell this vehicle. So we're here with a 250 series Prado, and it comes out with a 2.8 litre GD engine. Now this engine's a proven engine, a hell of a lot of punch for what it is, and it's also got really good consumption. The interesting thing about this setup, it comes with a 48 volt, and that was only something that was fairly new to the Hilux, and now they have it in the Prado. The 48 volt system is a micro hybrid. It definitely gives you an assistant with parasitic loss. It's hard to notice that difference, and unlike other hybrids that you may have been in or know about, it doesn't give you a hell of a lot more. So the expectation around the hybrid, I don't think that's something to really have a huge discussion about. This GD engine actually came out in around 2016. There's been some changes along the way, but it's been out for quite some time. In the earlier pieces, there were some timing chain issues and some small minor problems with this motor that it seems to be they've rectified as they've moved on over time. About 2020, they changed to what they call an IART system, which has a different injector and also a different turbo on this model of engine. The cool thing is this engine is actually in the 79 series, which is the GDJ. It's in the Prado, it's also in the Hilux, and this variation of the engine is very similar between all three with only slight changes. Particularly this one has an air-to-air intercooler, where the 79 series has a water-to-air intercooler. So there is some small differences, but overall they're around all the same power level. It's a proven platform. It works really, really well, gets great consumption. I think you can't go past this particular motor. I think they've done a fantastic job all around. GWM Tank 500. Well, this car was definitely a bit of a insight to seeing what a hybrid system would be on this type of vehicle. Now, this is a 2 litre petrol engine that's turbocharged. It's a really punchy little engine, but it's even more exciting when you add the hybrid in, and it gives the car a really good acceleration. My problem is with this car, and being a hybrid system in our country, as the car gets older, it needs to have parts replaced, the availability of those parts, and also if you were to break down, who would be able to work on this car. It's a common problem that I see in a lot of different models of vehicles coming to Australia. So just remember, the support with this vehicle is something that I would be concerned about as a mechanic. But overall, fun car to drive. Moving forward to the Ford Everest, and something I think that's really special to mention on these cars, and not just these cars, but also the 250 series Prados and the Ineos Grenadier, is the fact that these cars have AdBlue. You might not know what AdBlue is, but AdBlue is a chemical that we add to a tank, and that is injected into the exhaust system to help with emissions. The problem here is that you have to fill this up around every 10,000 Ks. Now, these tanks are very huge, and you know, the cost of the actual fluid varies, but it's not any more expensive than it is for petrol in your car. In previous models of cars over the years, we've seen that the systems can be problematic and have problems with sensors and blocking up, which are inconvenience to you guys. So I really hope these manufacturers have got this problem sorted, because the last thing you want to do is purchase a new car and have these problems. That being said, all new diesel cars coming out in the future will have AdBlue, and it's just something we'll have to deal with. Now, this particular engine, I was a bit apprehensive about it, and the reason for is that I've seen it in previous models of vehicles and they've had some problems. It's a 3-litre V6 diesel engine, and I would expect this car to produce a little bit more power than it does. In saying that, it is actually really smooth to drive. I think the problems that Ford have had with this and the volume of cars that they sell, I'm sure they've rectified those issues, so that may be nothing to go on. But all in all, great gearbox, engine's very smooth, very quiet. I would have loved a bit more power, but overall, not a bad car. This car has a 4JJ3 engine in it, and back in the day they had a 4JJ1 series, which was very, very similar and went for a lot of years. This engine was pretty much bulletproof up until around 2017, and they changed some things like the injectors and turbos on this engine, and the turbos were a huge fail point on that series of engine running through. But the great thing about that is in this model, the 4JJ3, they've changed the turbo, and they've actually gone away from a Mitsubishi turbo that was on there back to an IHI turbo, which seems to be more reliable. The good thing about this 4JJ3 is that it is a proven engine, and we have seen that in the past that a lot of people have had this car, and it has got huge popularity in Australia for guys touring on that sort of scale where it's an affordable car to buy. The Ineos Grenadier. Now, this engine is a 3-litre 6-cylinder diesel inline. It has a compound turbo on it. It is a punchy little engine, and it has been proven. It is actually what they call a B57 engine. Now, I haven't seen much of this engine in Australia other than in BMW, so it's really interesting to see this platform in a four-wheel drive that we have here. I have some concerns. There's a lot of tech that's in this engine, and also, from this car, it looks very agricultural from the outside, but I think that you may find that you have problems if you start heading in bush and you're trying to get parts of this car. It is another problem that we'll see, is trying to get everything for this. You only have to have a look inside on these things, and you start to have a look around, and there's a huge amount of stuff going on here. I don't want to take away from that because I love techie stuff. However, when we talk about rural areas and reliability, it's usually these things that get you unstuck. So it's to be mindful of those things. This engine has a ZF gearbox in it, it's 8 HP. The auto is sensational, the engine is smooth, it does what it needs to do. Something else worth mentioning is the coolers on this car. It has a front mount intercooler which is substantial in size, and it's an air-to-air. It also has other coolers in the bar for various other things on this engine, which is really cool to see. They have a really good air induction coming in there for cooling, which is something to be considered of in Australia. It's interesting to see what they've done here, but the question will be, will it hold up? Nissan Patrol Y62. Now, this is the car that probably contends against the 300 the most in any of the markets. It is a 5.6 litre V8 direct injection engine. It is petrol, however, and that is the big thing, that's the big difference here. So it does use a fair bit more fuel than it would be in, say, the diesel variant in the 300 series. At the moment, it's using around 18 litres per 100 Ks with a lot of the driving we're doing around here. What will be interesting to see is when we start towing, and we know those figures are going to increase tenfold. So that will be interesting to see what those numbers will be. All in all, it's a good engine, but moving forward with the Y63 that's about to be released, the tech is quite low, and I believe the tech will come in that motor coming forward. I guess the difference here is that this engine is starting to come to an end, and this may be the last time that you can buy a V8 in this size car in our country. Moving forward to the V6 twin turbo, I think the only option here is if you want a V8, this may be the only car you can buy. The Mitsubishi Pajero Sport. I have a soft spot for it. It has a 415 engine, which is a 2.4 litre diesel, right? This engine has a variable intake cam, and that helps with mid-range and top-end power, which is pretty cool, which none of the other diesels have. My only bone to pick with this car is this turbo. Now, this turbo surges around 2200, 2500 RPM. And what that means is the fact that the compressor design of that turbo is not allowing the engine to swallow the air, and you're creating this surging and oscillating on the turbo, and it creates this noise coming through that you hear audible in the car. Now, it's not audible when you are not towing, but when you start towing heavy loads like we have been, you start to notice that more and more, and it's quite hot at the moment, so surge will be more prominent in these temperature conditions. Something else that's worth mentioning on this car is that it has an external transmission cooler, which I personally think is really cool. Mitsubishi have thought about what they're doing with this car and know that transmission temps can be a problem, so they've actually fitted one from factory with a transmission cooler, which is, I think, an added bonus to this car.
The best tested with a 300 and Y62, and the experts back this up. The Prado and Isuzu engines are definitely the most proven for reliability, so they get very high marks too. The GWM hybrid might be great for city driving, but we aren't confident with its longevity or ability to handle touring with heavy loads. Now it's time to judge these vehicles on how easy they are to modify and turn into proper touring four-wheel drives. Because let's face it, most of you aren't planning on keeping any four-wheel drive you own stock. Despite the cost of the Ineos Grenadier, we reckon by far out of all the vehicles on the test, this one is the easiest to modify. And as a couple of the experts have mentioned so far, the reason for that is you can tell Ineos during the design really thought about the end user and what they're going to be using this vehicle for. It's rugged and utilitarian. There's a couple of things I want to take you through to point that out. So first up, obviously it comes with a bull bar. You can actually remove these hoops and just have a tubeless bar if you want to. If you get a different spec model, so we've got the Trailmaster, it actually can come with a winch, and then it's in the bar ready to go from factory. However, Dave from Offroad Animal has mentioned that you're limited with the size of winch you can fit and how much rope you can fit on the drum, because it's quite tight in there with these bars. So if you want to fit a full-size winch, you need to change bars. That's something to keep in mind. But the fact that it comes with this already, if you're doing lighter stuff or a bit of farm work, suits it really well. But come with me, a couple of other things I want to point out. As we've mentioned already, you get proper all-terrain tyres on it when you buy one, which is excellent. This raised air intake, something that is a bit worth noting, is the indicator is mounted on the outside of it. Now, I'd imagine this isn't a fully sealed snorkel. If you want a proper snorkel, you'd probably have to change it, and that's worth keeping in mind where this indicator is. So if you're doing lots of deep river crossings, despite the wading depth of this being quite high, I reckon this is something to look out for. Moving back, you've got these rails here and they're all over the vehicle. Where that would be awesome for is mounting things at camp. Like you could bolt a table on there if you wanted to, and you've got more table space to work. Real handy, little things like that. You can tell they've really thought about us. And then up here, this is probably one of my favorite things. So of course you got these tie down rails. If you don't have a roof rack already, you can strap swags on there, ready to go from the factory. But this is really cool. Under here, you've got pre-wired Deutsch plugs ready to go. So all you need to do if you want to bolt some lights on your roof rack or onto here is literally plug the Deutsch plug into there, and you've already got it switched, wired, fused, ready to go from the switches in the overhead console. That's real handy. You've got 4 around the vehicle and you can use them for a bunch of different things. I reckon that is probably one of my favorite features on any of these cars for ability to modify. The other thing is if you buy one of these, you'll literally be able to throw a fridge in the back and some lights and go away. And the reason for that is it comes with a dual battery system ready to go. You've also got this fuse card, which is real handy for diagnosing fuses. Unlike some other vehicles, you've got to stick your head under the dash and plug them out one by one. This one you can just sit next to the fuses and easily diagnose it. You can tell, as I've mentioned, Ineos have really thought about being able to use the vehicle. And as Jesse mentioned, the cost of these things from the factory is quite high, but when you consider it's got a lot of stuff installed ready to go that you don't have to spend on after you buy it, maybe it's a better option and you could save it in the long run when you compare it to buying a vehicle that's similarly priced but is bog stock. Something to keep in mind. As we've mentioned, these vehicles aren't for everyone. They're a bit polarizing, but there are a few things on it that are really impressing us. On the subject of the ability to modify these wagons into touring rigs, who better to help us understand what's needed in a tourer than Steve from Pinnacle 4x4. Not only do they help maintain the 4-wheel-drive 24/7 fleet of hard-working 4-wheel drives, but they also do a lot of wagon builds, from basic family tourers to big dollar continent conquerors.
We've got some really good choices as far as these vehicles go, in that they're all quite capable in their own respect and what they can do. If you're doing a lighter setup for some weekend camping, that sort of stuff, the Prado, the Everest, the MU-X, they're all great choices in that scenario. If we're looking to do something bigger for more touring, longer range, all that sort of stuff, really you're down to the Y62 or the 300 series, and that really comes down to axle weights. When you're building the tourer for that dream trip, it's going to take a lot of weight and a lot of gear to do it, and they're the vehicles that have the support to be able to do that. A prime example of that would be comparing the 300 series directly to the 250 Prado. And when we compare those two vehicles, even though they're very similar in physical dimensions as far as wheelbase goes, they're very different. Rear axles, much smaller in the 250 Prado with thinner materials, physically smaller diff assemblies. So when we're talking about needing to pull those heavier loads, deal with those extra weights, something like a 300 series just really comes into its own.
The inclusions from factory on the Ineos are excellent, so it scores highly here. We've also given the vehicles that have a heap of mods available high marks too. The Tank isn't supported in Australia with suspension and bar work and the like just yet, so for touring mods it scores the lowest.
All the interiors of these vehicles are modern and pretty nice, particularly when you're driving, but it's unanimous across all experts that the Prado has the nicest interior, which makes sense because it's the newest. The user interface is nice and easy to use. Everything while you're driving, it's not too complicated, but everything just works and it feels quite luxury in here. I reckon if the 300 comes out like this next year, it will be much better, because to be honest, the interior of the 300 feels a little bit more dated than the Prado. So if this is what Toyota are working with moving forward, this will be a really good vehicle to do big touring trips in. A couple of other vehicles where we've noticed different features and functions that don't work as well as they could. Obviously you've got the big screen in the Ford Everest, but a couple of the guys have said, and I agree with, that the controls for the aircon quite low down, so you're taking your eye off the road, and the screen is quite big, a little bit fiddly. Speaking of fiddly screens, the Tank 500, whilst that is the most spaceship feeling interior above all vehicles, there's a lot going on. To change settings, you've got to go through settings and find different things. It took me a good half an hour to find where the cruise control stalk is. It was hidden under here. Obviously I could have looked for it, but it was just hard to find whilst you were driving. The fact that it's a modern vehicle, it was built in August 2024, and the cruise control buttons aren't on the steering wheel, just little things like that you notice. The Grenadier, obviously a little bit more agricultural with the Speedo on the left-hand side. Again, something you have to take your eyes off the road for, but Recaro seats in it. Not a lot of legroom as we've mentioned. This one with heating and cooled seats, it's got everything you need for big touring trips, and the Prado by far has the best interior. So this being the first edition of these wagons coming out moving forward with an updated interior, it'd be interesting to see what the other wagons are like moving forward. Right now, the Prado wins for sure.
We know an important criteria for these new wagons is how well a family fits in the back. So for this next test, we've got a family of 5 and a group of our experts and told them to jump in each wagon and go for a drive. Here's what they found. The clear standouts for the family were the big rigs like the Y62, Prado and 300 series. The spaciousness inside the cab, with plenty of USB points to keep gear charged, and the rear screens in the second row in the 300, it was clear what the favourites were.
Have you got your aircon?
It's like a big lounge chair.
Yeah, it's like sitting in your sofa. Yeah.
The Tank 500 was very comfortable inside, with plenty of room in the second row. The experts enjoyed the comfort of the Ineos thanks to those Recaro seats. However, the kids didn't find it as comfortable, something to keep in mind for those longer trips away. The Pajero felt outdated inside, however, it was still described as a comfortable daily driver, with the MU-X feeling like it had slightly more room, but still following a similar trend of the Pajero in feeling outdated.
Oh, that's not too bad. My legs fit in.
Good, because we're not stopping for the next 12-hour road trip.
I really got a Jock.
The Ford Everest was most impressive on first impressions with its large infotainment screen. However, the seats didn't cut it for long distances. The clear standout was the 300 series, and the Prado scored well, mainly because it's the newest design and very well thought out for the driver and family. The Pajero and MU-X have aged a bit and are due for an upgrade inside. Most others scored solidly because they have excellent support from the aftermarket industry, and it's proven that you can turn them into comfortable, go-anywhere tourers. We can't have a wagon test without looking at one of the most important features on the vehicle you buy to carry the family around, the brakes. So we have Ian from Bendix helping us out. Ian has been with us for a few of the ute tests over the years, and when it comes to upgrading and maintaining your brakes in your wagon, Ian and the team from Bendix know just about all there is to know. He's also brought along a proper brake testing machine that'll measure stopping distances from 100 k's an hour. Let's see how they fared and then why. Ian will accelerate to 100 kilometers an hour and then brake to a stop once he crosses the markers.
Preliminary brake testing with the Y62, so let's give that a whirl. So no ABS, so just using as much brake as we can before an ABS activation. Let's go. And that never gets old. So that's 45 metres on the first trial. It's pretty bloody good.
With Ian doing the exact same test for each of the vehicles, the best performer was the Grenadier at 42 metres.
That pedal felt really nice and that car stopped really quickly.
Followed by the Pajero and Everest with a pretty incredible 44 metres. And the Y62 stopped at 45 metres. The Prado stopped at 48. With the 300 at 49, and further behind the pack was the GWM and MU-X at 53 and 55 metres respectively. The vehicle that felt the worst under heavy braking was by far the Tank.
Oh, yuck! That pedal went almost to the floor. That was terrible. The reason we've chosen these two cars to show you the brake packages is they kind of show the both extremes of what's on offer here amongst these wagons. So the Landcruiser and the Patrol have a really big brake package, and it makes a whole lot of sense because they're really big cars and they're really heavy. So it's a 354mm rotor, it's really big, and why is that important? That extra leverage essentially gives you more brake torque. So the bigger your rotor, essentially the more effective your braking will be. So whilst your friction's really important, that extra leverage really makes a huge difference. The Ineos actually shows us the other extreme of the brake packages on these vehicles. So the rotor on the Ineos is actually the smallest of this pack of 8 vehicles. So little surprise because it's also almost as heavy as the Landcruiser. So again, our leverage is reduced so we don't have the same level of brake torque. So whilst it's a smaller brake rotor and a smaller package here, the car actually stopped really, really well. Partly because it is quite a good caliper and there's a lot of meat around those pads. However, a larger rotor, that would have stopped a whole lot better. The biggest issue, of course, is with a smaller brake package, you're more open to fade. Bendix has a large range of brake upgrade kits, and this vehicle, whilst we unfortunately don't have one yet, this would really benefit from a big brake upgrade kit. That would make a big world of difference with a larger rotor and maybe a larger caliper as well.
As Ian mentioned, the Grenadier has a large pad on a small rotor. Whilst it did stop well, what you'll find is in repeated heavy braking, the smaller brakes would start to fade faster, as they simply can't get rid of the heat as well as a larger brake setup would. Remember, when choosing a wagon for towing or touring, the bigger the brakes, the better, and that's how we scored the wagons here. Well, boys, we're a couple of days in, a couple of thousand Ks in testing. Everyone's had a chance to drive different vehicles and get a feel for them. I guess it's one thing to do a test over a week and put these vehicles through different things on and off road, how they're towing. It's another thing entirely to see how they go after hundreds of thousands of Ks after 10 years of ownership that a lot of people watching this will probably do with them. I think for me, coming into this test, I had a few ideas of what vehicles I'd like and didn't like, and my opinions have completely changed after a couple of days.
You know, Jock, I agree with you. Pajero, particularly, I thought I would hate it, but it just did everything fine. It's, you know, value for money is there. It's capable. The 300 for me is, you kind of, because this is one of the more expensive ones, you don't want to like it. You're like, oh, it's so expensive. But everything's good about it. The motor's good. The brakes are good. Auto's fantastic. But yeah, look, the Prado for me, I think, is just such a nice place to be.
The thing I keep trying to ask myself every time I get into different vehicles, and the 300 is a prime example, as you mentioned, the price. You get in the Pajero, and I'm driving along, as you said, it's fine. I get in the 300, I'm like, this is fantastic. Is it double the price fantastic? And I don't think it is. I'd still choose it every day of the week.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point, because I think everybody likes the Ford, and I think we all do. But when you look at it, you could buy 2 of them with 1 of them. And I think that's the biggest part of it. So if you need a 2-car family, buy 2 of them for the same price.
And the ability to mod it as well. Like the tank, can you even mod it?
But there's not anything you're going to get aftermarket for that, really.
Availability of parts too, like if you're in the middle of nowhere, it's likely that you're going to get, I guess, 1 GD spares. Yep. You're probably not going to get many spares for a tank.
The biggest interesting car that I was interested in was the Ineos. Like, obviously the hype around that with 4-wheel driving and so forth. And it's such a, I guess, mixed emotions when you get in that car. I don't know what it is, but there's a lot of things going on. And there's a lot of great things about it, you know what I mean? Like even, for example, like we're looking through that handbook and like a hardcover handbook, and they've got a fuse card that you can pull out and you open the back seats and you've got, you know, factory drill batteries in the back of the car with all the fuses and accessory points you can put in, lights and everything else. And I think they really did well nailing all that, you know, for the guys that were buying that car. But again, it's so different that I don't know if I could see myself buying one.
We've mentioned the buy-in price of it too. I know a few of us have said it is quite expensive at 130, which is similar to probably the up-spec Y62 and a 300, but you got to remember that thing comes twin-locked from the factory. As you said, it's got dual batteries from the factory. It's got everything already auxiliary wired in to plug in. That's just going to save you hours on labour and stuff. So if you do break down those things and sort of, it's a bit more rugged of a bushproof vehicle, I guess you could factor the buying price actually being a bit cheaper, because if you buy one of these other vehicles,
for sure,
none of these other vehicles
have
have as much stuff. Yeah,
It's the only one with all-terrain tyres as well.
Exactly. Yeah, it's got rock sliders. Yeah, all that sort of stuff.
It's probably the only one on this test that you could buy it from the dealer, throw a fridge and a swag in, and go do a big trip, and you're ready to go.
Yeah.
Mike, you're a fan of the Y62.
He loves it.
Well, I am actually. The problem with it though is, as everyone's mentioned, it's a generation old now, and even from a styling point of view. But you know, I think that when you put it up against what's available right now here, what's in front of us, other than the 300, it I reckon holds its own well and truly, and it hasn't dated nowhere near as much as you would imagine.
There's a couple of things I noticed, and the Tank's probably a good example of it. I'm coming from a different perspective. You're probably similar, Jesse, where, Mike, as you said, some of these cars are in, you know, the price bracket that's for people who are a bit older and have a bit more disposable income. That is not me. These cars aren't in my price bracket. So I'm looking at it from, okay, based on my experience being out in the bush and seeing what can go wrong on these cars, what are they going to be like after 100,000 Ks? What are the rubber hoses under the engine covers going to be like? What are the fittings that you can't get to going to be like? All those things. And straight away, just looking at the Tank, when we popped the bonnet, it was such a minor thing, but I noticed one of the power cables for the hybrid motor was rubbing on the engine cover, and it was already rubbing up the braid on the engine cover, and whether or not a clip just came undone, but just little things like that, you wonder, how's that vehicle gonna go after 5 years of doing the daily drive, and then maybe if you did take the kids away with the camper trailer? I just don't know if it's got that, the refinement.
We said today over the radio, I remember, you know, 10 years ago, a Hyundai and a Kia, they were a cheap car that no one knew much about, like the Tank, and nowadays they're super flash.
The point is that they were cheap. But they were cheap. They got people into them and driving them to build the reputation. They did warranty, you know, they were good on warranty, all those sort of things. They did all of that stuff. Whether that happens with the Tank remains to be seen, but it's not a cheap vehicle. It's not a low point entry level vehicle.
That was the enticement to buy it, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was the enticement.
Sport is a cheap car.
It's a cheap car, but it's great value comparatively to some of these other cars that are, you know, $69,000, $70,000 thereabouts. For 75 grand, you can have that.
Is the Everest the only car with AdBlue? What's that take on that?
No,
and the longevity of that over the next few years.
And the Grenadier. Look, it adds a level of complexity, but it's not the be all and end all. As long as you maintain the system.
I guess trucks have been running it for years, and it works for them.
It's cheap. You use it like you might do one tank between services, which is bugger all.
Yeah, so it's not something to be concerned about at this point in time.
Not massively.
It's not going to be an option soon anyway.
No.
I'm excited to see who comes out on top, because it's still up in the air. I think there's a few vehicles that they're up there, but we'll wait and see, eh?
Yeah, definitely.
Cheers, boys.
Cheers, mate. You're cooking?
You're cooking. Did you bring the stuff? When you talk about what you trust out bush or in remote Australia, you have to look at brands that have already proven they can build a platform that can handle it. Toyota and Isuzu has been able to do that, as has Mitsubishi with their Pajero. The Y62 has been around a long time now and has been a good, reliable touring and towing rig, so this is where we put our highest scores. If this was just a regular Motojourno wagon test, we'd choose what we think is the best value for money daily driver wagon and weigh things like tech, comfort and the like a lot higher in our judging. But this is four-wheel drive 24/7. We look at these tests differently. And when you think about a good value touring four-wheel drive wagon, it has to have 4 key traits. It needs to be reliable, and big expensive things like the engine and driveline need to be proven and be known not to have major problems. It needs to be easily modifiable with a heap of aftermarket support. It needs to comfortably tow a decent sized boat, camper or hybrid. Other than the 300 or Y62, none of these should be regularly towing 3 tons or over. It also needs to be priced right for an everyday couple or family so they can own one. Rather than spending money on a monthly repayment, you can spend that on mods and using it. All the comfort, tech and features are a bonus. With that in mind, here are the prices for all wagons tested at test price and also the base model, so you know what the bare minimum is to get into the vehicle that you're considering. The 300 series was definitely the best tested and best overall winner. But you can't get into one for less than $97,000, which doesn't represent value for money. The Ineos had a lot of well thought out features, but having a price tag over $100,000 would put it close to the bottom of our value for money scoring. The Tank 500. If you're purely wanting to drive on the highway, it's decent value at $66,000. But as a tourer, it has next to no aftermarket accessories and an engine that you wouldn't take within 500 k's of Cape York. It doesn't score highly in this category. The Y62 is an excellent value for money tow vehicle. It's $10,000 cheaper than a base model 300 and can tow just as well. That's plenty of savings to pay for the fuel that big petrol uses. The Everest is a decent overall vehicle for its $74,000 price tag and will be good value for someone using it as mostly daily driving and going to hip camps 10 times a year with a caravan. But that engine and transmission has had issues, and we have personally seen these issues in Cape York with these rigs. It doesn't tick all the boxes. You can get cheaper Ford Everests, but it doesn't come with the V6 engine, which is one of the key reasons it scored well in this test. The cheaper ones come with the 2-litre bi-turbo, which is well known for being unreliable. The new Prado is an excellent four-wheel drive and will have aftermarket support very soon. It's got a proven engine, and despite having a new transmission, it's the same company that manufactured that tried and true 6-speed that's in vehicles like the D-Max, the 79 series Landcruiser and the N80 Hilux. We do wish it was a touch smaller and cheaper to separate it from the 300, but at $72,500, it sits the 4th cheapest four-wheel drive we tested. And that leaves us with the MU-X and the Pajero. Both have a very reliable engine and driveline. Tick. Both have a huge range of modifications available. Tick. Whilst there are better tow vehicles, both can comfortably tow a small hybrid or camper or a good-sized boat. Tick. And the price. You can get an MU-X for $55,000 and a Paj for under $50,000. Let's find out how the final winners are now we've factored in price. This has been an amazing test, but there can only be one winner. And based off all our testing and scores, the winner is the big Landcruiser 300. It scored the highest across all the sections bar one. It was capable, comfortable, beautiful to drive, and it towed the best. So based on the average scores across all our experts, the 300 has won. However, that one section where it didn't win is of course value for money, because whilst this vehicle was the best all round, the Sahara is $140,000, so it simply can't win there. If you're watching this and you've got your heart set on a 300, your best bet is to buy a lower spec model.
Now it's time for the winner of value for money. And why am I shooting this back in the shed and not in front of that winner? Well, the reason for that is it has taken us days going through all the prices and all the footage to determine which one was the best value for money. The 300 series was by far the best vehicle tested, but not the best value for money. And the winner, so close. For us, it came down to 4 of them. And if you're still watching this, chances are you've already decided on what vehicle is right for you. But you also might be keen to know what our opinion on the best value for money vehicle is, and here it is. Those 4 were the Everest, the Prado, the Pajero, and the MU-X, and here's why.
The Everest would be good value if you daily drive it in town and go to a hip camp every now and then, but we can't pick it because that engine and transmission has had too many issues for it to win a 4-drive 24/7 test. The MU-X and Pajero tick all the boxes, but They're both now long in the tooth and desperately due for an upgrade to compete with the Prado and Everest in terms of daily driving. For the price, they are incredibly good value wagons though, and we're so close to winning.
And that leaves one more, and to be honest, it is the one I really didn't want to win, the Prado. Why? Well, I guarantee the comments are already going to be calling us Toyota 24/7 because we have a tendency to lean toward them. I'm not going to apologise for that though, and there's good reason why. Let me explain. Mainly, the engine. It is already proven in the Hilux and the 79. What Toyota do so well is they take a platform like the 1GD and they refine it over time to make it even better. It is reliable and proven in a new upgraded platform. Aftermarket support will be available for the new Prado within the next couple of months, and this vehicle is going to be very popular, which means you will be spoilt for choice when it comes to aftermarket upgrades. Pair that with the best interior and the newest interior out of all the vehicles we tested, and we reckon that the Prado is the best value for money and comes in $2,000 cheaper than the base model V6 Everest. It's important to mention though, that's in reference to the base model Prado. The one we had on the test is not worth the near $90,000 price tag. The difference between them is negligible. So if you've got your eye on a Prado, look at the base model one, as we reckon it is the best value for money.
Well, that's it for our epic Wagon of the Year mega test. Congratulations to both our winners for value for money and best overall. What I really want to know though is which one would you pick? If you had the keys to any of these wagons, what would you choose to build the ultimate tourer and family daily driver? Let me know in the comments below. We'll catch you next time on 4Wheel Drive 24/7.